1, 2, 3, sound check, check. Can everybody hear me? What about folks upstairs? All right, folks upstairs can't hear. So if you want to hear, well, they can hear Cheyenne, because I can hear Cheyenne. And that group, for those of y'all without my supersonic hearing, was our executive director just asked the upstairs folks, does anybody here want to legalize marijuana in Texas? And it might be because I'm closer to y'all, but I'm going to give the victory to the downstairs people because it sounded louder to me. I guess we could let the It's a little unfair because they didn't know it was going to be a contest. Maybe we should let the upstairs folks have another shot at it. Just the upstairs folks. Is there anybody upstairs that's interested in fully legalizing medical and recreational marijuana in Texas ASAP? And downstairs, can y'all beat that? I guess not. Okay. It's time to start our monthly Texas NORML open meeting. My name is Jamie Spencer. I'm legal counsel for Texas NORML. We are going to do, in part, an Ask a Lawyer tonight. I already have several questions. There are also pads down there. If you haven't had a chance to write down a question, I encourage you to do so. We haven't done this since April, and we usually do it about twice a year. I'm also going to do some of the news around the country and maybe some stories that I found sort of interesting that can illustrate some legal principles for us so we can have a better understanding of what's going on around us and why we need to change it and what we need to do to change it. Also, I should say that Ask a Lawyer is my lazy excuse for making fewer notes for the meeting so that I can just kind of wing it. But let's get started with some of the... Oh yeah, and I may end up, during Ask a Lawyer, playing a little game I like to call Psychic. I haven't done this before, so we'll see whether or not that works out. Okay. So first off, can I see from the upstairs and downstairs, raise your hands if you're a member of NORML. I see several. That's great. That's awesome. We always love to have you out here. What about raise your hand if you're a board member? I see some board members at the table. We've got board members over here. Please take a look around. Go and introduce yourself. Oh, I should raise my hand too. After the meeting, please feel free to find a board member or another member of NORML and find out how you can be more involved. Speaking of that, show of hands, who is it your first meeting? Who's here on their first meeting? All right, we'd love to see that. We meet the first Wednesday of every month at Flamingo Cantina. Please remember to tip your bartender and bartendresses. And we have stand-up comedy coming on after us. I'll be getting off at about 9:15. The stand-up will start at about 9:25, and then there's going to be the Mau Mau Chaplains, free reggae for everybody, which is, of course, right with our theme. So we're going to have a great night tonight. I usually start by reminding people what our mission is, what our stated mission is for NORML. It's in two parts. The first part is to move public opinion sufficiently to legalize the responsible use of marijuana by adults. Now, public opinion has already changed, so we really need to move to not really changing the public's opinion because we're getting either majorities or supermajorities depending on how the question is asked about whether or not folks like the idea of reducing penalties, also known as decriminalization, or full legalization, or just for medical. When you put all the different possibilities together, Texans come in around 75%, sometimes higher, again, depending on how the polls are phrased. The second part of our stated mission is to serve as an advocate for consumers to assure that they have access to high-quality marijuana that is safe, convenient, affordable, and legal. And our next open meeting is actually going to be the Wednesday after the election. So we're going to beg you folks to please register to vote. Cheyenne, who you heard upstairs earlier, has recently become a volunteer deputy registrar, which means that we no longer have to just give you the voter cards and ask you to do the right things with them. You can, Cheyenne, is this right? They can actually just fill them out. Oh, there you are, sorry. You can just fill them out right here on the spot, and Cheyenne is authorized to turn them in legally for you, and you will be registered to vote. I believe next Monday, October 6th, is the deadline. So there's no point, even though we have a lot of marijuana fans, there's no point waiting until exactly the last minute. Let's wait till just tonight to give Cheyenne. If there's folks here... We have two. Great. Awesome. I did not know that, but good to know. So, and if you know anybody that supports our cause, another couple of things. We're going to have Betty Williams, who is our volunteer coordinator, talking a little bit later about our voters guide. And it can take one with you, especially if you know folks that need to register to vote or are registered but need to know something about their particular state representatives or state senators and their positions on it. Let's educate folks. We've got a little bit of time left to do this before the next meeting. All right. So, okay, I'm going to try something. Oh. And I'm sorry, speaking of board members, actually, Dave Bass just got up. He's in the hat and the cool beard, and he is our veterans coordinator. Are there any veterans here tonight? We always encourage veterans to come over and talk with Dave. Dave is an expert when it comes to veterans issues and marijuana. There actually are some really good things going on in terms of, well, relatively good things in terms of the VA. And also, one of the main things that we hear on Lobby Day when we go see the legislators next year is, well, I could make it legal on the state level, but it's still illegal federally. Well, there is a federal directive that says, and Dave, you're going to correct me even though I'm a lawyer if I'm wrong on this, that if you live in a state that allows either limited medical marijuana or complete marijuana like Colorado, that the VA will not cut off your benefits just because you come up dirty for marijuana, which is what's happening to a lot of veterans. And I can tell you, for those of you that weren't here for the fun of Lobby Day 2 years ago, that really the legislators probably take veterans as seriously or more seriously than anybody else that we put in front of them. We had doctors, nurses, patients, and veterans, and caretakers, personal caretakers, professional caretakers, those sorts of things. But the legislature is loath to spit in a veteran's face, as they ought to be. So educate yourself about what the possibilities are. Come talk to Dave Bass, he's our veterans coordinator. Okay, so I'm kind of an old fuddy-duddy. I check Facebook myself about once every 3 weeks. But we're going to do something a little bit new tonight. Does anybody here, by show of hands, just pick up your phone and wave it at me if you have Facebook access on your phone? Facebook access on your phone. Okay, if you would, you're going to get a little freebie out of this if you do this, by the way. If you would, search for TXNORML on Facebook, and we might have a recent post on there from Cheyenne that talks about being at tonight's meeting. If not, you could just scroll down a little bit lower than that, and there's a post by Jax Finkel, who's not here tonight, but she is our deputy director. Is that the right title? Anyway, if you will, like us and share or reshare one of these TXNORML posts that we have up top on Facebook talking about tonight's meeting and those sorts of things, so that all your friends can find out about next month's meeting, we have a free button for you over at the table. Just come show us your Facebook that you have done it. But we also have some other merchandise if you want to support us. That'd be great too. We have some awesome t-shirts and stuff like that. But if you'll come to our table and show us that you reshared us and liked us on Facebook, we'd love to give you a TXNORML one. All right.
Is it the first one on the search?
We'll do it for any of them. We had some trouble coordinating it exactly tonight. Just anything that you share from us is good for a button tonight. The question was, is it the first one? But just find whatever of the first 3 or 4 posts that you think is a good thing that you want to share on your feed, and ta-da, magic button. Okay, I saw in the news recently what I thought was a really interesting case of a young man in Colorado. His name is Brandon Coates. He used to work for the Dish Network. By show of hands, has anybody heard about this case? He got fired for coming up dirty for marijuana. I actually really didn't know a whole bunch about it, okay? But this is a really good example of what I would call mixed issues of fact and law. And one of the things that I like to do when it's my month to come up here and talk about is the legal process and how it works, so we can all have a better understanding of it. Most of the time when people pose me hypotheticals, and I'll be answering the Ask a Lawyer questions in a little bit, there's 2 different aspects of it. First, there's going to be a fact finder. In a pretrial suppression hearing where I'm going into court on behalf of my client and saying, hey, they shouldn't have stopped my client's car, or they shouldn't have searched my client's person, or they shouldn't have been allowed to get this search warrant for my client's house, most of the time, the person who is deciding what the facts are before applying those to the law is going to be the judge, not a jury. Texas is a little bit different because there are ways of submitting those issues to the jury, but that gets a little complicated. We're going to ignore that for tonight. So, back in 2010, this young man, Brandon Coates, worked for the Dish Network in a call center, and he tested positive for marijuana. Now, he is a quadriplegic, and he uses a wheelchair, and he never hid his off-duty medical marijuana use from his bosses. They knew about it, but he came up dirty on a UA, and they fired him. Now, Dish argued that Coates, the fired employee, had violated their zero-tolerance drug policy, and they said, this was their argument, that he was going to be treated no differently than an employee that showed up drunk. This is where issues of fact and issues of law collide, because there doesn't seem to be any evidence of impairment, or at least that's how it's being reported in the news. This is a Colorado case. I'm not the lawyer. I don't know all the facts. But just because you have a dirty UA for marijuana, of course, doesn't mean that you are impaired in any way on marijuana at that particular time. So the court has to take a look at the factual issues first before deciding what laws apply. Now, I'm going to let you know. Another reason I'm telling this story is that this is a future law that I dream about for Texas. After we start decriminalizing, making medical marijuana legal, and then finally full legalization, which will happen, we're going to need to think about laws like this, because Colorado has a law that we don't. Coates brought his lawsuit against Dish Network under a Colorado law called the Lawful Off-Duty Activities Law. This was actually implemented many years back on behalf of cigarette smokers, primarily. I'm actually kind of surprised that it was probably the cigarette companies that managed to bribe the legislature to do this. But this law was not intended in any way to have anything to do with marijuana, because marijuana was not a lawful activity. And as many of you know, and maybe all of you know, Colorado is legal now. That law specifically says that employers cannot fire people for doing something legal on their own time. You can see how that would work in terms of cigarette smoking. I imagine that we probably have some cigarette smokers here. I'm not going to ask you to raise your hands. And the cigarette smokers have probably faced actual discrimination. And without a state law like this, there's no federal anti-discrimination law that helps for smokers. It's not a civil right to be able to smoke a cigarette. And so, for example, Texas, which is a right-to-work state, You can be fired for any reason. That's another wonderful thing about the law. They have phrases like right to work state, which actually means I'm the employer and I have the right to fire you. But Colorado has this very specific law. So that really isn't a factual issue at all. What they have to do is they have to take the facts of this particular case and see whether or not it applies to this law and then how it applies in his particular case. And then there's some other issues that make it a little bit more difficult. I think I mentioned that he was fired in 2010. Well, in 2010, pot was not legal in Colorado. So Dish Network may have something to fall back on here, and one of the things that I think is really, really great about this case is that since Colorado is sort of a forerunner in the legalization movement, what we're going to see, and my prediction is, we're going to see a lot of different scenarios that you don't necessarily think about in terms of unintended consequences when you have the state go legal. I certainly hope that this young man wins his lawsuit, or at least that he has the right to proceed to sue, because Dish Network is trying to just throw him out of court entirely and say that he can't even, he doesn't have a leg to stand on. But this can go one of two ways. Obviously, the court can make the right decision, what I think is the right decision, in this case right now, or if they decided on the procedural grounds of, well, it was okay for Dish Network to do that in 2010, and I think they have a good argument. I mean, I'm just not sure that, I'm sorry, I've got to read this again, I've never heard of it. Colorado's lawful off-duty activities law probably doesn't apply to this young man based on something that happened 4 years ago. Well, some other Coloradan will have another bite at the apple, so we're actually going to have at least two chances to win this issue. And again, I just thought that was sort of an interesting case. I am going to, since I now have used more than 1/3 of my time, I'm going to switch over to Ask a Lawyer and try to get to some of these questions. I'm probably not going to be able to get to them all, so if you see me around and I didn't answer one of your questions, please come up and ask me afterwards. I have a question here about laws about filming the police. It's not really asked in question form, but this is probably a come and talk to me after about it. It's also a pet peeve of mine. For those of you that don't know, there are, obviously with our smartphones now, we have tons and tons of people videotaping arrests on 6th Street and those sorts of things. Who here by a show of hands has heard anything about police department officers arresting people for filming them when they're arresting other people? Does everybody know that that's a problem that's going on in our town right now? Okay. My prediction is that I think it's eventually going to get to the Supreme Court, and I see no way other than for the Supreme Court to rule that we have an absolute right to do that. There are First Amendment issues. Again, it's kind of separate from the marijuana talks that we're talking about here, but feel free to come up and talk to me about it, especially if you know something specific. What do you see as the #1 concern that weed smokers face today? That we can go to jail for it? I mean, I'm not trying to be a smart aleck. That's what we're here for, is to change the laws. Wow, I love this one. What happens when receiving a package from FedEx that has weed that's not yours?
Hypothetically.
I'm sorry, the writer of the question meant to put hypothetically.
I did not write it.
Well, okay, handwriting sample, please. So, this brings up two different legal issues in my mind. When I see the question asked as weed that's not yours, I think of that as sort of an ownership issue. And this is something that my clients tell me regularly. Yes, Jamie, I was at, fill in the blank, the name of the park, the drag, out in public, whatever, and I did have a baggie of weed in my pocket, but but it was my roommate's weed. Well, the crime is not ownership of marijuana. In fact, in theory, you could own marijuana and not possess it. The crime is possession of marijuana. So let's just, I don't think that's really what the question is necessarily going for, but don't forget, possession. Possession is 9/10 of the law. Possession is 10/10 of the crime. It's not ownership. Now, there are obviously times when you can own and possess marijuana, or you could be in charge of an organization that owns a good deal of marijuana. And there's something called the law of parties. If I owned a huge organization that in one way or another employed folks that sold marijuana or distributed it to people that sold it and those sorts of things, the law of parties says that if I'm involved in something, in for a penny, in for a pound. To take it outside of the context of possession of marijuana, if you say, Jamie, I'm really thinking about robbing the 7-Eleven because I need some cash, but I need a ride, and I say, okay, I'll give you a ride to the 7-Eleven, and I give you a ride down there, and I stay in the car, and you go in and shoot the clerk, I'm on the hook for murder. My punishment may be less. It may be a mitigating circumstance that I didn't even know that you intended to kill the clerk, or maybe you didn't. But you were committing a felony, and I was helping you in some way. I was aiding you in that felony, and somebody died. So, yeah, I mean, ownership and possession can, mix, obviously, but you got to worry about possession. The other thing that we're talking about here is the innocent possessor defense. And it's important to remember, I don't have to run into court and prove that my client is innocent or that they're not guilty. The state has to turn over to me the evidence that they think shows that they are. And the truth of the matter is, this is not just a hypothetical situation. I'm going to tell you exactly what really happens in these cases. Yes, of course, my client knew either, because it's one of two things, either that he went to California and mailed himself some marijuana, or his buddy in California or Colorado or wherever mailed him the marijuana. I mean, I'm aware that not all of my clients are 100% factually innocent. But what the police have is a call from FedEx that, typically this is how it happens. Somebody calls me on the phone and says, hey, I'm a little nervous about something. I was going to go to the FedEx store. I pretty much know exactly where it's going. And I say, well, let's not talk on the phone. Why don't you come in? So now they're sitting across the desk from me. And they say, and I'm pretty sure there was some weed in the package. And I say, I'm a criminal defense lawyer. I'm not going to tell the cops or the prosecutor or the judge anything unless it's something that helps your case. You can tell me that you know there was weed in it. And he says, yeah, I know there was weed in it. But it was my buddy that sent it to me, and now FedEx has told me that they want me to come down to FedEx because there's something about my package. They sent me this note, they put it on my door, and I say, don't go. But there are other scenarios, too, where they see you going to the store to pick it up and those sorts of things. Again, if you think about it, if I mail you marijuana, even if they could prove that you directed me to mail you the marijuana, okay, now at that point you're going to be in some trouble. You're probably going to be in some federal trouble if you put it in the U.S. Post Office. But what about the postal worker? He's carrying a box to your house, right? He's sending it down on your house. He is actually in possession of marijuana. Well, he isn't, and the reason, actually, anybody want to guess for me why he's not guilty of any crime? Besides the fact that he's a government worker. He doesn't know. Intentional and knowing possession of marijuana. The postal worker defense. So two things. They're never going to be able to prove you knew what was in the box, and you didn't put it in the box. And I guess the second thing is, don't do it. Because you can get in some trouble. On that note, goodness, I really am wasting my time here on this question, but I'm having fun with it. I got to tell a war story. I had a client, and they got out of trouble. And then they called me about 2 or 3 years later. This is actually a cocaine case, the second one, but it would work just the same for marijuana. Well, she had decided that she wanted to throw a party for her boyfriend's 30th birthday. Does this sound familiar? Does anybody remember me telling this story before? I don't see any nodding heads. Okay. So she had a friend mail her some cocaine. She had the sense to use DHL instead of the United States Postal Service. And this is where it gets like a sitcom. DHL accidentally delivered it to her neighbor, who opened it and called the police, who came over and read the name on the box, and they contacted my neighbor, and she said, she hadn't called me yet, she said, yeah, my boyfriend is turning 30, and I thought it was a good idea to have him mailed some cocaine. Number one, don't do that. Number two, she was no-billed by the grand jury. The grand jury did not have enough evidence to proceed against her. So, I mean, there was not possession of cocaine. And I talked with the prosecutor, the grand jury prosecutor beforehand, and I believe, I'm not allowed in the grand jury room, I believe that the prosecutor softballed it. Maybe, I don't know that they're exactly doing me a favor, but I don't think that they were really looking forward to trying to prove that case in court. The grand jury process is very one-sided. The prosecutor can just come in and say, hey, I mean, they don't have to have witnesses. They just come in and say, hey, I got this police report here. It says that Jamie's Klein did a bunch of bad stuff, and I want you to give me an indictment for yada, yada, yada. I'm being slightly facetious, but it's really not necessarily much more than that. But that's kind of an illustration of the what happens when receiving a package from FedEx that has weed that's not yours. Okay. I did promise Betty Williams a spot, as well as myself a break, so she's going to come up here and talk to you a little bit about the voter's guide, and then I'm going to hurry up and get done by 9:15. All right, here she is. She is the official title of the volunteer coordinator, and she's going to talk to you about our voter's guide, which we have over there on the table for you. Betty.
Betty, and I'm the volunteer coordinator for TXNORML. I'm responsible for making sure we have people at the table. Like this? Yeah. Oh, hi. I'm responsible for making sure that we have volunteers at all of our events, that we do like awesome reggae events, like any events we're invited to. Our big push right now, however, is to get these TXNORML voters guides out into the hands of the public. And right now we are looking for people to place them with permission at places like libraries, supermarkets, places where everyone goes. Because this isn't just dedicated to us. This isn't just dedicated to people who are stoners. Like, we need to get these out to like mom, dad, 2.5 kids, because there's a lot of people still in the cannabis closet. And if they have this information, they can make an informed decision about who to vote in. So they may not be comfortable coming out to meetings, they may not be comfortable being a member, but they are comfortable going into that voting booth and privately selecting a name. So we're looking for people to hand these out. We also have a members mixer coming up, which is for members only, so you can join right over there at our table. We are looking for people to volunteer for that as well. If you volunteer for at least a 3-hour shift, you get in for free. And you're just going to be like setting up, tearing down, running errands for people, whatever we need. Volunteering, I started out with NORML 2 years ago, 3 years ago. Just volunteering at the table, like an hour or two at an open meeting, and then as I got more experience, I started seeing more and more NORML, and this is how we really change laws. We don't change laws by sharing stuff on Facebook. That's nice, and it's fun, but we change laws by getting out to the public, being responsible people, and saying, hey guys, someone worked really hard on this. This is pretty much everyone needs to know. Like, we had a lot of feedback for this that you need to make an informed decision. And whenever we leave them, we don't leave them just like at headshots. We're going to leave them at supermarkets, libraries, anywhere that you would normally go, dry cleaners, anywhere that you would normally go in your day-to-day life. So what we're really looking for is people in different districts and different areas in Austin. What we're going to do after I get off of here, if you're interested, meet me at the table, and we'll kind of go over some different stuff for you. We'll look at like maybe where your district is just to make sure that people aren't overlapping too much. If you're interested in volunteering for the members mixer, first of all, you have to be a member. So go over to our table and join. Our lowest membership is $15. That'll get you through the door, and you can volunteer. And actually, I think that's it. Thank you guys so very much. Again, how we change things is by volunteering. We don't change things like this is nice and this is a great first step. The next step to come into a meeting is volunteering. It's not as scary as it seems. It's so fulfilling. My entire mood changes when I come out and volunteer. Because I know I'm being productive, and I know that my actions are having a direct impact on how people see candy teachers. Because they think we're amazing. And we're not. We're responsible adults. And what we choose to do inside our own house is our own business. And the laws need to reflect that. And the only way we get the laws to reflect that is if we go out, hand these out, and change people's ideas. So thank you guys very much. Again, I'll be over at the table with these voters guys talking to dedicated, trustworthy, dependable volunteers who want to hand these out. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you, Betty. I want to get to upcoming events so that I make sure not to miss them. I think there's some really fun stuff coming up. October 5th, which is this Sunday, is going to be the family-friendly meetup, and that's going to be at Central Market Park on Lamar near 38th, right? Central Park there?
Playground.
There's a playground and a playscape and those sorts of things. Okay, and then on October 15th, we're going to have our monthly strategy meeting. That's going to be, I believe, at Red Hills North. I don't think we have the exact location on our website, but check for that if you want. And then, October 31st is our annual members mixer. Now, I am well aware that we are competing with Halloween, but I can't tell you, what I have to do right now is kind of not totally let you in on a little secret, but I'm going to say this. Not only do you get to come and hang out with other members, and not only are there some goodies and fun times to be had, and do we know who the band is, Cheyenne? Well, we have music. It's a great time, but how shall I put this? Everybody that attends is going to get a special prize. There's not a lottery for it. No, it's not a bag of marijuana. Believe it or not, it might be, and I'm surprised that I'm saying this to a group of normal folks, but it's possibly better than a bag of marijuana. It's going to be a little bit of peace of mind. That's all I can tell you about it. But it's pretty exciting. If you're there, not only are you going to be happy about it, but you're going to tell your friends about it. And my prediction is that the members mixer for 2015 is going to be super crowded when people find out what we're doing for the members at this particular mixer. So anyway, it's going to be good stuff. And then November 5th, the day after the election, we'll be back here at Flamingo Cantina for our open meeting again. And we hope you all come, and we hope you all bring a friend as well. Okay. I'm going to give you guys a choice. I'm kind of leaning one way, but don't let me persuade you. Tell me what you really think. I can either read you and talk to you about some science about marijuana being in somebody's system and how long it stays in your system and some legal problems that have arisen for clients of mine on that sort of thing, or I can go back to Ask a Lawyer questions because I'm not going to be able to get through all of them. Folks wanting more Ask a Lawyer? Okay, well, Let me see if I can do both of them. I heard ask the lawyer first, and if I don't get through everything, because I do want to give time for our comedians and of course the reggae that comes after that, just come talk to me after the meeting. Super huge question here that actually was an issue recently for some friends of ours and some members of NORML. Do you have to identify yourself to a police officer? I'm going to actually read to you specifically the Texas statute, section 3802 of the Penal Code, called failure to identify. A lot of folks think, hey, I don't have to tell the officer anything. And sometimes you're sort of right, and sometimes you're not right at all, and always you are questioning the authority of the big burly man with the gun, so there's always a little bit of danger involved no matter how you proceed on it. Failure to identify. A person commits an offense if he intentionally refuses to give his name, residence address, or date of birth to a peace officer who has lawfully arrested the person and requested the information. Under Texas law, you're only required to give your name if you are under arrest. Let's read the second part. A person commits an offense if he intentionally gives a false or fictitious name, residence address, or date of birth to a peace officer who has lawfully arrested the person, lawfully detained the person, or requested the information from a person that the peace officer has good cause to believe is a witness to a criminal offense. Now, the only reason the police are coming up and harassing you in the first place is because they either want to arrest you, or they want to stop you and ask you questions, or they want to about what you're doing, or they want to stop and ask you questions about what that guy right next to you or the guy across the street is doing. So, you could construct a hypothetical situation where you could give a false name, address, or date of birth to a peace officer and it not be a criminal act, but realistically, never give a false name. I suppose the flip side of that is, I don't really know how many, I get the clients where they gave the false name and they didn't get away with giving a false name. I have no idea whether or not folks are 90% successful in saying that their name is Bob Smith, or 10% successful because the people that didn't get eventually arrested by the officers don't come to me. So I kind of have a biased view on that, but I'm not going to change my opinion. The false and fictitious name is just silliness. But you're going to run across two different types of officers. When you are not under arrest and you tell the officer, hey, I saw some lawyer tell me that if I'm not under arrest, I don't have to tell you my name, my address, or my date of birth. Number one, you're most likely to run across the kind of officer that doesn't believe you and or doesn't care. And again, with him being the big burly man with the gun, you may be going to jail that night. I've had those cases where they literally said that the only crime that they witnessed my client commit was not giving their name, and therefore, y'all can already see where I'm going with this. It wasn't possible for them to arrest my client for something they hadn't done yet, and then have him, fail to give his name. Those cases got dismissed, but my client spent the night in jail. So I'd still say you should be a little bit hesitant about that. But at least you're in the right. That's officer number one, the one that doesn't really know the law. And they really are out there, and they're probably at least 50% of them, at least when you throw in don't know and don't care. The second type of officer that you may run up against in this situation is the officer that knows that he has to come up with some reason to arrest you so that then he can re-arrest you and double up with the failure to ID charge. And the truth is, jaywalking is an arrestable offense. Anybody see that woman that got arrested for jaywalking in Austin on YouTube? Folks, anybody see that? Okay, if you didn't see it, There was kind of a blow-up in the news because not only did they arrest her for jaywalking, but she had earbuds in. She was clearly listening to her iPhone, iPod, and she didn't respond to their commands to stop because clearly she didn't hear them. They came and tackled her and kind of beat her. Seriously, don't you saw that on YouTube? Okay. All right. So, again, they can just come up with some, I'm going to use a really technical legal term here, I'm sorry for that, but they can just come up with some bullshit reason to arrest you, and then your failure to ID is also a potential crime. So, seems like a good idea. When I was 17, 18, 19, these are the sorts of things that I thought, and before I went to law school, I learned some things about police power and those sorts of things. Although, as I always tell people, if it was expunged, it never happened. Okay. I'm going to save some of these other questions for future Ask the Lawyers. I'm going to see whether or not I can satisfy some of those folks who were crying out for science. So, I'm helping a lawyer on a case where his client has gotten himself into enormous trouble for what should be a lot less than 2 ounces, Class B, misdemeanor. He has no record at all. Should be no big deal to get it eventually dismissed if he jumps through some hoops. And yet, this young man finds himself in some huge trouble. It is an ongoing case, so I can't identify where it is and those sorts of things. But let me tell you all, back to the law before we get to science, that if you commit a Class B Texas state misdemeanor on federal properties, they have 2 different ways that the defense can come after you. One is there's a general law that says, hey, if something's if there's federal property within Texas, that everything that would be illegal in Texas, like DWI is something that they sometimes do. If you are DWI on a federal property, they'll often prosecute you under this law that says they could just take the state law and kind of co-opt it and make it federal. Or, in the case of marijuana, technically, although no one's almost ever charged with it, possession of tiny amounts of marijuana is a misdemeanor, which under the sentencing guidelines you can easily get up to 6 months in jail, and this time it's a real threat, unlike state. So there's this client that they're prosecuting for this. Long time, federally, by the way. There's a reason they say they'll make a federal case out of it. Long-time, chronic medical marijuana user. And of course, when you're out, he got bond immediately. And when you're out on bond for the federales, you have to go to what's called pretrial services, and they have supervision, and they give you urinalyses. And he kept on failing the drug tests. And he kept on saying it was because, of the prior use. And eventually he had a clean urinalysis, and then he had a dirty UA after the clean analysis. And the judge threw him back in the pokey, and he's doing, right now, way more time in the federal system than folks do for the underlying crime that he's being charged with. And I reached out to Paul Armentano, who's the Deputy Director of National NORML. He sent me an email, and I want to ask him some questions, because I know that he's an expert when it comes to urinalyses. And his response to me, I'm mostly just going to read it, because he's way more up on the science than I am. I assume when you, he's talking to me, refer to marijuana in your email, you mean specifically carboxy-THC, the fat-soluble primary metabolite of THC. Because of its lipid solubility, it may possess a prolonged half-life in urine, far longer than the presence of THC in blood or leadum hydroxy-THC, which is a psychoactive metabolite. He goes over some of the review of the literature here. If you'd like to talk to me about that, that's fine, but I've got to wrap it up here. Where they had subjects who tested positive after 93 days, one who tested positive after 95 days, a third who tested positive for the carboxy tetrahydrocannabinol for 110 days after cannabis abstinence. And some of these even included times when there were intervening periods in, before that 110 days where there was a clean UA. And kind of to take this whole thing full circle with the legalities that I was talking about, the problem is that this, because it's a pretrial issue that deals with bond. Bond means you have to stay in jail until your case is resolved, and you get to be out and be free until your case is resolved. Because it's a bond issue, we don't get a jury on it. We're dealing with a judge who just doesn't believe that such a thing is possible. So, helping this other lawyer work with the science on it. But again, you got to be careful out there. I'm almost overstepping my bounds here on time. We really appreciate y'all coming out. In about 10 minutes, we're going to have the stand-up comedy tonight. The Outlaw Montgomery Wayne is here. He will be your MC for that. And the Mount chaplains are coming on afterwards. As always, we very much appreciate Flamingo Cantina for hosting us for years and years now on the first Wednesday of every month. We'd love to see you and your friends out here on November 5th, the day after the election. Please come and talk to any of the board members. Go over to the table, show us your little Facebook thing, get your free button. We're going to get this done, guys. Appreciate you coming out tonight. Thank you very much.
Right morning when my work is over, I'll fly away home. Lord, what bright morning when my work is over, I will fly away home. One bright morning when my work is over, I'll fly